Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be tackling some common English mistakes. You know, the kind that can trip us up even when we think we have a pretty good handle on the language.
Exactly. Like those little slip-ups that make you think, wait, have they been saying that wrong this whole time?
Exactly. And to really get to the bottom of these common errors, we've got a whole stack of resources here. Articles, linguistic research, even some fun historical tidbits, just to really dig into the why behind these mistakes.
Yeah, we're not just going to point out what's wrong. We're going to explore the how and the why, giving you that extra level of understanding to help you catch yourself next time. And maybe even, impress your friends with your newfound knowledge.
I love it. Okay, so where should we kick off our linguistic adventure today?
Well, I thought we could jump right into a grammar gremlin. It's notorious for causing confusion.
Yeah.
The infamous there, and there trio.
Yes, those three.
They sound exactly the same, but their meanings are, as different as a kitten from a lion.
I have to ask, is this just a modern-day spelling nightmare? Or does this confusion have, historical roots?
Oh, that's a great question. It actually goes way back. The use of there, and there, as we know them today, it actually became standardized in the 18th century. Before that, spelling was much more fluid, and variations were really common.
So basically, we can blame those 18th century grammarians for our homophone headaches.
Well, maybe not entirely. I mean, standardized spelling was a huge step forward, but it also created some new challenges, especially for words that sound alike but have totally different meanings.
Okay, so let's untangle this homophone web a little bit. Most people know the basic definitions, there for location, there for possession, and there as a contraction of they are. But are there any sneaky situations where these words can still trip us up?
Absolutely. One common mistake is using there when we should use there,
Yeah.
especially when we're referring to something that, belongs to a group of people. Like you might see someone write, the team celebrated their victory, when it should be their victory.
Ah, yes. It's so easy to slip up when you're thinking about the excitement of the victory and not focusing on the possessive pronoun.
Exactly. And another tricky situation is using there when we should use there. This often happens when we're describing something that exists or is happening in a particular place. For instance, you might hear someone say, there are going to be a lot of people at the concert, when it should be, there's going to be a lot of people at the concert.
Okay, I see how those subtle differences can lead to some grammatical slip-ups. Any other there traps we should watch out for?
Well, here's one that even seasoned writers sometimes fall into. Using there when referring to a singular noun that could be either male or female. You might see a sentence like, each student should bring their own lunch.
Oh yeah, I've definitely seen that before. So grammatically speaking, what's the issue there?
Well, traditionally, there has been considered a plural possessive pronoun.
Yeah.
So it should only be used when referring to multiple people or things. When referring to a singular noun that could be either male or female, the grammatically correct options would be his or her, or to just rephrase the sentence to avoid the pronoun altogether.
Right. So instead of each student should bring their own lunch, we could say each student should bring his or her own lunch. Or even better, all students should bring their own lunches.
Exactly. That way you avoid any grammatical ambiguity and ensure that your sentence is clear and concise.
I'm feeling much more confident about my their game now. Let's move on to another grammar classic, one that often causes confusion even among native English speakers, the I versus me dilemma.
Ah, yes. This one's a perennial source of debate and uncertainty. But don't worry, we're going to break it down and equip you with the knowledge to wield those pronouns with confidence.
I'm all ears. It's time to finally conquer this grammatical conundrum.
The key to understanding I versus me is recognizing their grammatical roles in a sentence. I is always the subject, the one performing the action. Me, on the other hand, is always the object, the one receiving the action or being acted upon.
Okay, so in simple sentences like, I am happy, or she gave the book to me, it's pretty straightforward. But things get trickier when we start adding more people to the mix, right?
Exactly. A common mistake is using I when we should be using me in compound phrases, especially after prepositions, like to, for, with, or by. For example, you might hear someone say, between you and I, when the correct phrase is, between you and me.
So how can we avoid falling into this common trap?
Here's a simple trick. Mentally remove the other person from the sentence and see if it still sounds grammatically correct. If you wouldn't say between I, then you need to use me in the compound phrase.
Oh, that's a great tip. I'm definitely going to be mentally removing people from sentences from now on.
It's a surprisingly effective way to ensure you're using the correct pronoun. Now, there's another interesting aspect to this I versus me debate. The influence of evolving language norms and the rise of informal communication.
Oh, this is where it gets really interesting. Tell me more about how language is changing.
Traditionally, strict grammarians have insisted on using I in all subjective cases, even in informal contexts. But in recent years, there's been a growing acceptance of using me in certain situations, even if it might not technically align with formal grammar rules.
So are we saying that me is becoming more acceptable in everyday speech?
In certain situations, yes. For example, in casual conversation, you might hear someone say, "Me and my friends went to the movies," rather than the grammatically correct, "My friends and I went to the movies."
So does that mean grammar rules are, becoming more relaxed?
It's not necessarily about rules becoming more relaxed, but rather about recognizing that language is constantly evolving and adapting to the way people use it. While formal grammar rules still hold importance, in written communication and formal settings, spoken language often takes on its own nuances and variations.
That makes a lot of sense. Language is a living thing after all, and it's constantly changing and evolving. So while it's essential to understand, the fundamental rules of grammar, it's also important to be aware of how language is used in different contexts and to adapt accordingly.
Precisely. It's all about finding that balance between grammatical accuracy and natural, effective communication.
I love how this seemingly simple grammar rule opens up a whole discussion about the evolution of language. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of this I versus me debate.
We definitely have. And it's a reminder that even seemingly basic grammar concepts can have hidden depths and fascinating complexities. But I think that's a great place to pause for now.
I agree. We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive. From those tricky homophones to the evolving nuances of I versus me. But our language learning journey isn't over yet. Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll delve into more common English mistakes and uncover the linguistic gems hidden within them. Welcome back to our deep dive into common English mistakes.
Yeah, we've already tackled some tricky grammar points.
Yeah.
And even explored, the evolution of certain language rules.
It's amazing how much depth there is to even the simplest words and phrases.
Absolutely. And that's what makes language so fascinating.
Okay, so where are we headed next on our linguistic adventure?
Well, since we've been talking about grammar, I thought it would be interesting to explore another area where mistakes often crop up, the realm of questions.
Questions. They seem so straightforward. But I know there are some subtle nuances that can really trip us up.
Exactly. And one of those nuances is choosing the right question word. It might seem simple, but using the wrong question word can lead to, confusion and miscommunication.
Can you give us an example?
Sure. Let's say you're trying to find out how someone learned a new skill. You might be tempted to ask, "Where did you learn to play the guitar?"
Okay, so what's wrong with that question? It seems like a perfectly natural way to phrase it.
The problem is that where asks for a location. But learning a skill isn't about a physical place. A more precise question would be, how did you learn to play the guitar?
I see. How focuses on the method or process of learning, which is what we're really asking about.
Precisely. And this distinction between where and how can be tricky because in some cases the answer might involve a location. For example, if someone learned to play the guitar at a specific music school, they might answer the where question with the name of the school. But the emphasis of the question should still be on the process of learning, not the location itself.
Okay, so it's all about being mindful of the specific information we're seeking and choosing the question word that, best conveys that intention.
Exactly. Now let's move on to another pair of question words that often cause confusion. Who versus whom?
Oh, this is one that I know I've struggled with in the past. It feels like one of those grammar rules that's easy to forget.
It's definitely a tricky one. But don't worry, we're going to demystify it. The key to understanding who and whom is to think about their grammatical roles in a sentence. Who is always the subject, the one performing the action. Who is always the object, the one receiving the action or being acted upon.
So in a simple sentence like who is calling,
Yeah.
who is the subject because they are performing the action of calling.
Exactly. And in a sentence like, to whom are you speaking? Whom is the object because they are the one being spoken to.
Okay. I'm starting to see the distinction, but things get a little more complicated when we have more complex sentences, right?
That's right. Here's a helpful tip. Mentally rephrase the question as a statement to see which pronoun fits better. For example, if you're not sure whether to say, Who did you invite to the party? Or whom did you invite to the party? Sure. Try rephrasing it as you invited him to the party.
Okay, so in that rephrased sentence, him is the object, which means we should use whom in the question. Whom did you invite to the party?
Precisely. That little trick can help you navigate those tricky who versus whom situations.
That's a great strategy. I'm going to start mentally rephrasing questions from now on.
It's a simple but effective way to ensure you're using the correct pronoun. And it highlights the importance of understanding the underlying grammar rules, even in casual conversation.
Absolutely. It's like having a secret code that helps you unlock the mysteries of language.
Exactly. Now let's shift gears and explore another common English mistake that often goes unnoticed. The misuse of prepositions.
Oh, prepositions, those little words like in, on, at, to, from. They seem so simple, but they can be surprisingly tricky.
They definitely can. And one of the reasons prepositions can be so challenging is that their usage often doesn't translate directly from other languages.
Right. So even if you have a good understanding of grammar in your native language, you might still struggle with prepositions in English.
Exactly. And another challenge is that prepositions often have multiple meanings and can be used in a variety of ways.
Can you give us an example?
Yeah. Take the preposition on, for instance. We can use it to indicate location, as in the book is on the table. We can use it to talk about time, as in the meeting is on Monday. And we can even use it to talk about a state of being, as in he's on medication.
Wow, that's a lot of different meanings for one little word.
It is. And that's why it's important to pay attention to the context, in which a preposition is used to understand its intended meaning.
So how can we master these slippery prepositions? Is it just a matter of memorizing all the different rules and exceptions?
Well, memorization can be helpful to a certain extent, but it's not the most effective way to learn prepositions. The best way to develop a natural feel for prepositions is through exposure to authentic English.
So reading books, watching movies, listening to podcasts, basically immersing ourselves in the language as much as possible.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. The more you practice using prepositions in different contexts, the more comfortable you'll become with their nuances.
I love that approach. It's not about striving for perfection, but rather about embracing the process of learning and allowing ourselves to stumble along the way.
Precisely. And that brings us to another common English mistake that often arises from this fear of making mistakes, the overuse of filler words.
Oh, filler words, those little ums, ahs, likes, and you knows that, sneak into our speech when we're trying to gather our thoughts.
Exactly. While filler words are a natural part of spoken language, overusing them can make us sound, hesitant or unprepared.
So how can we minimize those filler words and speak more confidently and fluently?
One helpful tip is to become aware of your personal filler words. Pay attention to your speech patterns and, identify the words you tend to overuse.
Okay, so once we've identified our filler word culprits, what's the next step?
The next step is to practice replacing those filler words with pauses. Instead of saying, or like, when you need a moment to think, simply take a brief pause to gather your thoughts.
I see. So it's about training ourselves to embrace those moments of silence instead of filling them with unnecessary words.
Exactly. Those pauses might feel a bit awkward at first, but they actually make you sound more thoughtful and deliberate.
It's like giving our brains a moment to catch up with our mouths.
Precisely. And over time, those pauses will become more natural, and you'll find yourself speaking more fluently and confidently.
This is such valuable advice. I'm definitely going to start paying more attention to my filler words and practice those strategic pauses.
I think that's a great place to wrap up this part of our deep dive. We've explored the nuances of question words, delved into the world of prepositions, and even tackled those pesky filler words.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground today. But our language learning journey isn't over yet. Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll explore even more common English mistakes and uncover the secrets to speaking and writing with clarity, confidence, and style. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into common English mistakes.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey so far. Exploring the intricacies of grammar, pronunciation, and even those pesky filler words.
It's amazing how many subtle traps there are in the English language, even for those of us who use it every day.
And it's really cool because it's
and today we're going to shift our focus to a common mistake that can really impact
and
the clarity and flow of your writing
culture.
Incorrect
you're right.
punctuation.
Punctuation. It might seem like a small detail, but I know it can make a huge difference in how your message is perceived.
Absolutely. Punctuation marks, they act like signposts. guiding the reader through your sentences and
you have
helping them
totally
understand
blanked
your
on their name.
intended meaning.
We've all been there.
So let's
What do
talk
you
about
do-
some
how
of
do you
those
recover?
punctuation pitfalls
And this
that even
podcast is
experienced writers
dissecting,
can stumble
like,
over.
the phrases
Where should we
people
begin?
use to get
Well,
through that
one
awkward
common
moment.
mistake
It's
that
true.
often
Those
trips
little
people up
phrases can
is the
reveal
comma
so much
splice.
about social dynamics.
It happens when
Yeah.
two
You know, the
independent
psychology of
clauses,
memory?
which could
True.
each stand
We use
alone as
language
complete
not just to
sentences,
convey
are just joined
information,
together
but
with
to
only a
smooth
comma.
over those.
Can you give us an
The bumps
example
in
of a
interaction.
comma
Yeah,
splice
exactly.
in
So
There's
action?
this one
Sure.
phrase that
Let's say
really
you
caught
write,
my
the
eye,
sun
and they
was
kept
shining, the
highlighting it
birds
in
were
a bit
singing.
of a hurry.
Those
Oh,
two
yeah.
clauses,
Good
the
one.
sun was shining and the
isn't it?
birds were singing,
Like a polite
could
way
each
to
be their own
excuse yourself when
sentences.
you're rushing.
That's
Simply
true.
connecting
So
them with
instead
a
of being
comma
like, oh, we gotta
creates a
run,
comma
they give
splice.
examples like,
Okay, I see how that
drive
sentence feels a
faster,
bit
I'm in a bit
clunky
of
and
a hurry.
disjointed.
Yeah,
So how can
or
we
I
fix
can't
it?
talk right now. I'm in a
Well,
bit of a hurry.
there are a
Yes,
few options.
exactly.
One is
That's a
to
good
simply
one.
And it's
separate
so
the
much
clauses into
softer
two
than just
distinct
saying, like,
sentences.
I'm late.
It
The
is,
sun
it's
was
more
shining,
polite,
the
for
birds were
sure.
singing.
It is.
You're acknowledging
Another
that
option
you're
is to
imposing
use
on
a
the other
semicolon
person's time.
to
You are.
indicate a
By
closer
being in a
connection
hurry.
between the
Exactly.
clauses.
And like a way of saying,
the sun
I'd
was
love to
shining, the
chat,
birds were
Yeah.
singing.
but I can't
So the semicolon
right now.
shows that
Right.
the
And
two
then there's
ideas
the
are related,
phrase,
but they
contact
still
details.
need like
Oh,
a
that's a
stronger
classic.
separation
Yeah.
than just a comma.
Pretty straightforward,
Exactly.
like phone numbers.
And the third option is to
email
use a
addresses
coordinating
and all that.
conjunction
Yeah, just
like
the
and or
basics.
but
It
to
struck
connect
me
the
as interesting
clauses.
because it's like
The sun was
in our
shining and the birds were
hyper-connected
singing.
world,
I like how each
that
option
phrase
creates a slightly different
has
effect.
become so essential.
The period
really has.
creates
It really
a sense
has.
of
Because
separation.
it's all about that
The
shift,
semicolon
right, from
suggests a
face-to-face
closer
to
relationship,
constant
and the coordinating
digital
conjunction adds a bit
Yeah.
more nuance.
Contact
Precisely.
details have become
And choosing the best
courtesy of
option really depends on the
relationships.
specific
that.
context
You know,
and the
both
tone you
personal
want to
and
convey in your
That's
writing.
so true.
This is a
Currency
great
of
reminder that
relationships. I love
punctuation
it.
isn't just
Okay,
about
so
following like
the phrase that really
rigid
made me
rules.
think, though,
It's about
was
making
slipped
conscious
my mind.
choices that enhance
yeah.
the clarity and
It's so
style of your
evocative,
writing.
right?
It
Absolutely.
is. It's like the
Now let's move
information
on to
literally
another
slid out of your
punctuation mark
brain.
that
It did.
often
It just
causes
left it.
confusion.
And they gave examples
apostrophe.
like, I'm sorry, I forgot to
the
respond to your
apostrophe.
email.
It
just
seems
slipped my
simple
mind.
enough,
Oh,
but I
yeah.
know it can
Or
be
even
tricky,
funnier. Oh, no,
especially
it's
when
your
it comes
birthday,
to
completely
possessive
slipped my mind.
Oh,
nouns.
that's a
You're
good
right.
one.
Yeah.
I
One
like
common
that
mistake
And it's like
is using an
we're giving
apostrophe
ourselves
to make a word
permission to
plural, like
forget
apples
by
instead of
using that
apples.
playful language.
Apostrophes
are.
are primarily
It
used
turns
to
a
indicate
potential faux
possession
pas
or
into
to
a
form
shared joke.
contractions.
That's right.
Right, so to
instead of
show
saying,
possession for
"I
a
forgot,"
singular
which
noun,
sounds
we
really
add an
robotic.
apostrophe and an S,
Right.
like
Slip
the
my
cat's
mind
toy.
adds humor.
But for plural
and makes
nouns
you
that
more
already end in
relatable.
S,
It
we just add an
softens it.
apostrophe
Yeah, and that's
after
what
the
this
S,
language
like
podcast
the
is
dog's
all
bowl.
about.
What's that?
Exactly.
about
And when it comes to
helping people sound
contractions,
fluent and
the apostrophe
comfortable
replaces
in
the
these
missing
everyday
letters.
situations.
For
Right,
example,
so it's not just
can't
about the accuracy.
is a
it's
contraction
about
of cannot.
understanding the
And
nuances of
it's
communication.
is a contraction of
like how to use
it is.
humor.
Okay, I'm
to
feeling more
build
confident about my
rapport.
apostrophe
Yes, exactly.
usage now.
And,
Are there any other punctuation pitfalls we should be aware
Okay.
of?
And
One more that comes
they
up
take
frequently
these
is
phrases
the
and
misuse
they throw
of
them
quotation
into
marks.
real-life scenarios.
Remember, quotation marks are
fun.
primarily
I know,
used
right.
to
So the first
enclose
one is
direct speech
around
or
here.
quotations.
Right,
Which
so if I'm
means,
writing
like,
dialogue,
close
I would
by.
use quotation marks
You might
to
ask, like,
indicate
is
the
there a
words
bank
that are being
around here?
spoken.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Or there's a
And if
great
you're
restaurant
quoting
right
someone
around the
else's
corner.
Right
words,
around the corner,
you would
that's
also
a good
use
one.
quotation marks
And
to set off
it's
the quoted
interesting because
material.
It makes this
So what are some
assumption
common
of
mistakes people make with
shared
quotation
space.
marks?
It
One
does.
mistake is
Shared
using
knowledge.
quotation
Yes.
marks for
You're
emphasis.
inviting the other
Like,
person
this is
into
very
your understanding
important.
of the local
In this case,
environment.
italics
And,
or
like,
bolding
you're
would be
creating
more
this little
appropriate ways to
micro-community
emphasize
right
the
in that
word
moment.
very.
Exactly.
That's a good
so then
point.
they move on to a
Using
phrase
quotation
that,
marks for
let's be
emphasis can
honest, we all
actually
use
like
terrible.
undermine
Oh,
the
yeah, I
intended
use that one a
effect.
lot.
Any
Me too.
other
Like, you're
quotation
terrible
mark
with numbers.
quirks we
Or
should
I'm
watch
terrible
out
with
for?
directions.
Another common mistake
Yeah,
is
I'm
placing
terrible with
punctuation marks
That is a good one.
outside the
And that
quotation
raises
marks
this
when they should be
interesting question
inside.
about
For example, if
self-deprecating
you're ending a
humor.
sentence
Yeah,
with a
why are we
quotation,
so quick
the
to point out our
period should go
weaknesses?
I know,
inside
right?
the closing
Is it a way to
quotation mark.
disarm
like
others?
this.
Maybe.
Or
The
manage
author wrote,
expectations? Is
"This
it just like a
is the
cultural
end."
quirk?
Could be all of the
Okay,
above.
so it's all
Yeah.
about paying
And it's almost
attention
like we're
to the
preemptively
placement of those
apologizing
punctuation
for
marks and
any
making sure they
potential
like
mistakes.
We
align
are.
with grammar
But in a
rules.
way
Exactly.
that makes people laugh.
And as with
That's
any
true.
aspect of
It totally
language,
takes
the
the
more you
pressure off.
practice
Yeah,
and
it does.
expose
And
yourself
speaking
to
of
correct
feeling the
usage,
pressure,
the more
they
natural
go
and
into this
intuitive
fluency
those
builder
punctuation
segment
choices will
where
become.
they
This has been
analyze
such an
greetings, like,
enlightening
how's
deep
it going
dive into the world of common English mistakes. I feel like we've covered so much ground.
Which can feel
From tricky grammar points to pronunciation pitfalls
you wouldn't say that
to
like
subtle
everyone
nuances of
Yeah.
punctuation.
I feel like
Yeah,
how's
it's been
it
a
going
pleasure
is perfect
exploring
for
these
casual
linguistic
settings.
complexities with you.
But you
And
wouldn't
I'm
use
sure
it
our
if
listeners have
No,
gained
you
valuable
get some strange
insights that they can
looks.
apply to
Might
their
even
own
lose your
speaking and
job.
writing.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's true. Like
Remember,
choosing
the
wrong
key to
greeting
mastering
is a
any
social
language
faux
is
pas.
to approach
It
it with
is for full,
curiosity,
like showing
a
up
willingness
to a
to
party and
learn,
whatnot.
and, you know,
Totally.
a sense of humor.
Yeah, don't be
It
afraid
does,
to make
and it's
mistakes.
fascinating because
They're all part of the
these
learning
subtle
process.
choices
So keep exploring,
levels
keep
of
practicing,
familiarity
and
and
most
social
importantly,
You're right,
keep
it's like
having
a
fun
secret
with the
code
English
It is.
language.
that tells you about the
Exactly.
relationship between
And
two
with that,
people.
we've reached the end of our
Exactly.
deep dive.
And they even
Thanks
share
for
their own
joining us
stories
on this
about
linguistic
forgetting names.
adventure.